Okay, so when we left off at class on Monday, we had just finished up talking about the function and structure of the vertebrate central nervous system. And recall that when I talk about structure, I'm referring to the anatomical structure, and function is the physiology, so the way that we use those structures. So we had just finished talking about, we covered a little bit about the spinal cord, including the gray matter and the white matter, but also talked about the different regions of the brain, and then the 5 tenets of the brain, that its function is localized and can be essentially mapped onto the locations of within the body itself. And that size is important, so bigger brains are better, and bigger forebrains in particular are better. The last thing, or the next thing that I want to talk about is we're going to cover now the same function and structure type of organization, but we're going to look at the peripheral nervous system in this case. So what we are talking about here is, again, the peripheral nervous system is any of the nerves that exist outside of the central nervous system. So any of the nerves that are not a part of the brain or the spinal cord. And we've talked about sensory neurons and motor neurons, but these can also be called afferent neurons. So here we've got afferent neurons, which are essentially the same as sensory neurons, again carrying the nerve impulses to the central nervous system. And then efferent neurons, which are essentially motor neurons, and those carry the impulses away from the central nervous system to the effectors. So here, where our sensory neurons previously existed, are now, we are going to refer to them as afferent neurons. And the motor neurons are also referred to as efferent neurons. Okay, so our vertebrate peripheral nervous system, again, I think I alluded to this earlier, but it consists of these bundles of nerve fibers, which contain the axons of the neurons themselves, and then are also interspersed with some blood vessels, and then also connective tissue to hold them all together. So the major difference between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system is that in this case the nerves are not integrated. And what that means is that there are no interneurons that exist in the peripheral nervous system, which you can see in this diagram here, because the peripheral nervous system is only including the sensory input from those sensory neurons and the motor input from the motor neurons, or the efferent and afferent neurons. The integration exists and happens only in the central nervous system, and that is where all of those interneurons. So all of the information that travels through the peripheral nervous system has to be funneled through, essentially, the central nervous system in order to be processed. So we've got 2 different types of nerves that exist. The first are cranial nerves, and these are the nerves, again, which contain the axons and blood vessels. And those cranial nerves connect our peripheral nervous system to the brain, and then the spinal nerves connect the peripheral nervous system to the spinal cord. So if you remember, our peripheral nervous system is further subdivided into the somatic nervous system, or our voluntary nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system, which is our involuntary nervous system. And in those different segments of the peripheral nervous system, the neurons themselves have different structure. And again, this is related to the different functions that they exist, or that they perform in these different subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system. So in the somatic nervous system, which is again our observable behaviors, or our voluntary nervous system, we're talking about things like locomotion, movements, including the muscular system and that sort of thing. So in this case, we're going to have our motor neurons extend from the central nervous system all the way to the effector nerve, or to the effector organ, to the skeletal muscle, to whatever it is that is carrying out the message that is being relayed through that neuron. Okay? So they extend directly there, and because of that, they don't communicate with other neurons. In the autonomic nervous system, what is a little bit different is that they're going to be connecting with other nerves. Okay, so here, if you look down here, we've got our spinal cord, which is again our central nervous system, showing a voluntary motor nerve directly innervated with our skeletal muscle. And this is our somatic peripheral nervous system. But what you'll notice in the other different diagrams above that is that we're seeing shorter nerves connecting to different nerves and then connecting or innervating with those effector muscles. And this is the big difference between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so what we see is that we've got, and if you follow along on this diagram or this flow chart down here, you can see that it shows the same thing as what's showing in these pictures. So you've got your nerve extending from the central nervous system, in this case the spinal cord, and then this is what is called a preganglionic neuron, which innervates or communicates with a second nerve at what is called the ganglia. Okay? At the ganglia or the peripheral ganglia, that is where the motor neurons synapse with other motor neurons and transfer information to what is called the postganglionic neuron. And this is the neuron that is innervated with the effector itself. So you can actually, of course, further divide the autonomic nervous system into two different further subdivisions. You can actually divide it into three. We're going to ignore enteric for now because that is going to come up later on in the semester. But the two main branches of the autonomic nervous system are the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So the first one is the sympathetic nervous system, which I'm guessing some of you have heard referred to as your fight or flight response. So this fight or flight response is again a part of our autonomic nervous system. In this case, it is the sympathetic section of that nervous system. So we've got, again, our ganglia. So we've got a preganglionic neuron communicating with a postganglionic neuron at that, in this case, it's going to be called the sympathetic ganglia. Okay, so that is the region of the synaptic communication. And in the sympathetic peripheral nervous system, what happens is that those ganglia connect our spinal cord to the effector. So in this case, we're looking at the section of this picture over here. So all of these green neurons are part of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So in this case, the ganglia are located close to the spinal cord, which means that those preganglionic neurons, or the neurons that connect the spinal cord to the ganglia, are going to be the shorter ones. And you can see that in the picture here. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system here has this short preganglionic neuron, which synapses at the peripheral ganglia with a longer postganglionic neuron, which then innervates with the organ or the effector muscles. In the sympathetic nervous system, most of the preganglionic neurons, the neurotransmitter that they release at this synapse here, at this ganglionic junction, is going to be epinephrine, which makes sense because we're talking about a stressful response, an innate response to stress, and epinephrine is our stress hormone in this case. And we'll talk more about that in class on Friday and then also next week. So then the last part, or the last thing that I want to talk about is the second section of the involuntary nervous system, and that is the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I refer to this kind of as the business as usual. Okay, in this case, we're talking, again now just to orient you to this picture, it's the same picture just flipped onto the other side of the slide. we're looking at these purple neurons over here. So these neurons are coming from the brain. Again, they're all coming from the central nervous system, but in this case we're talking about nerves extending from the brain stem, in this case, to the different effector organs. All right, and because they're coming from the brain, the preganglionic neuron in this case is going to be the long neuron. Again, it synapses with the postganglionic neuron at that ganglion junction, or in this case the junction right here. And then the postganglionic neuron is going to be the short neuron. And this is going to then innervate again with the organ or the effector muscle. Okay, so again, the main difference between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems, well, there's a few. The first one is that the parasympathetic neurons, the preganglionic neuron extends from the spinal cord, from the brainstem to the effector muscles, whereas the sympathetic neurons, those extend from the spinal cord. Okay, that's the big difference. And then the difference in the size of the preganglionic neuron versus the postganglionic neuron are also important. Okay, so now that we've covered the entirety of Chapter 14, what I'm going to ask you guys to do is go to the course page on the MyNorthland website for vertebrate physiology. This is your, it'll be under, all of you will be under Section 360, Section 1. And starting tomorrow, on Tuesday at 5 p.m., this will say, there will be an assignment here, and it will say Pop Quiz number 2, I believe. Right now it's not active because it's not up yet, but to get here you'll just go to My Courses and then you'll go to Coursework, and that's where I'm at right here. So starting tomorrow there will be an assignment right here, Pop Quiz number 2, and you will have 15 minutes to complete the pop quiz based on all of Chapter 14. Now you can use anything that you want in order to take this test. You can use your notes, but again, you only have 15 minutes to do it. And it will be mostly short answer. There won't be any long essays, so don't worry about that. Short answer, multiple choice, fill in the blank, that sort of thing. Just similar to the exam. It won't be very difficult, but you will need to understand the concepts that I presented in class on Monday, and also the rest of the video that you just watched. And you can watch this video multiple times. And you will have until 5 p.m. on Thursday to complete this quiz. So as soon as you're ready to take it, you can just click on that and we will be done, and I will see you in class on Friday. If you do have any questions, send me an email. I'll be at a conference, but I should be able to have access to my email throughout the day. Good luck.